Hello, good morning, Shira.
Good morning, Esty. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to be talking about authenticity,
Yes.
being authentic. And I think it's a really good topic to come after vulnerability because I don't think that we can be authentic. I don't think we can be vulnerable without being authentic.
Right. I think the difference between authentic and vulnerable is that vulnerable is the sharing of something private or the sharing of something that's personal to you,
Right.
whereas authentic is like day to day living as an authentic person. Like it's making sure that your choices are in line with who you are and doing things that are in sync
Right.
with yourself.
And I think that, why is this an important topic is because if we're not being authentic with ourselves, at a certain point, it catches up against us. And that's when people maybe suffer from a mild form of depression or just don't feel good about themselves or have an identity crisis.
Yes.
When suddenly not being aligned just doesn't sit well anymore.
Right. And that's where you see a lot of like midlife crises, like not just, people in their 20s, but you see it in people in their 30s and 40s and 50s where all of a sudden they need to buy a new car or all of a sudden like they're questioning their religion or all of a sudden like sometimes you see this with women where they just go on these crazy diets and all of a sudden they've lost tons of weight. Usually that's an indication that there's a big crisis going on, like empty nest syndrome or something is shifting that they're like losing their authenticity.
Right. And I think that everybody has authenticity inside of them. It's just about that being aligned with who they act or that being shown to the world. It's not like you have to create authenticity in people. It's like within us, we just have to allow it to be or to be seen.
Winnicott, who was a psychologist or psychiatrist, I think psychologist, he speaks a lot about authenticity, and he has these concepts of where he says it's the true self versus the false self. And the true self is where you're basically authentic with yourself. That's you, who you are when you're born, the raw version of you. But what happens is as you go through life, there's different things that happen to you or different things that you need to protect yourself from. So then you have a false self that gets like surrounded over you. So it's like if your true self is in the center, all of those false selves are like rings around you, so much so that you might be blinded from that center of the true self.
Right.
And the false self, what that means is society says act this way, or your family says don't do that, act this way. Constantly like there's shoulds and don'ts and have to be's. And therefore all of those walls sometimes like even prevent you from being yourself and also prevent you from even knowing yourself.
Right. And so Gabor Mate, he says that the reason that happens that you just said is because especially as children, we need attachment more than we need authenticity.
Yeah.
So we give up our authentic self in order to be attached, whether that's to society, to your parents. And therefore you could have both, but if they're not aligned together, you need attachment in order to survive. So people will give up their authenticity until they forget about that. And then as they get older, something's misaligned and they don't know what it is because they've been kind of letting themselves go in order for a different purpose that was needed at that time.
Right. Like I've been with so many people who they say like, I just lost myself. Like, I don't know who I am anymore. Or they feel very conflicted inside. And a lot of times is like what they're doing is not in line with who they are, or it's not in line with their true authenticity. And they can't put words to it. But that's really what's happening is that they're living a life, but it doesn't feel like their life. It doesn't feel like the life that they want because they're not being authentic to that self that they've lost many years ago. And so like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had it where I'm sitting with somebody and it feels like they're just like a facade. Like they're just like not themselves. Like they're not in line with themselves. And it doesn't feel like it's easy to speak with them because you don't know who you're talking to. You feel like all the answers are just the answers that they know you want to hear rather than what they want to say.
Yeah, and I think that when someone is being authentic, like it does take courage because people might not like what they're saying and they might not want to, be around them then.
Right. Yeah. No, it definitely takes vulnerability, right? There's an element of vulnerability to show your authenticity. But there is like a niceness of being around people who are authentic. Like it just feels more wholesome.
Yeah. It's more wholesome relationships, that you can trust them. What you get is what you get. And they're not, let's say, talking behind your back after you leave,
Yeah, exactly. And so how does somebody find their authenticity? Like, let's say, what we said before about there's these false self adaptations around the person. How do they then get towards that authenticity in order to choose?
Yeah, I think somebody needs to like take a look at their life and like kind of look at what's their values. Like that's the place to start off. Like what's my values? What's integral to being part of me and being part of the world? And then now how am I living that's not matching those values? And then how do I want to fix those values?
Right.
So let's say a value of someone is to be honest and is to be a true friend, but they're in a group of people that like gossiping is what makes you cool and being snarky is what makes you cool. So they've been doing that. And then they might need to question that behavior that they're doing. That behavior is not aligned to their values. So therefore they're not being authentic to themselves. And they might lose some relationships when you do that. But the kind of relationship, authentic people or good-hearted people are going to be happy. They might say something like, I'm waiting for you to stand up, you know? And people who are going to be like, whoa, I don't
want to see that.
I don't like that. They probably weren't really a good relationship for you anymore if they can't handle you being authentic. But sometimes, and this is what I said before, sometimes people need that attachment too much, so they're not willing to let themselves be authentic.
Right. Like they give up for relationships.
Right.
Like the relationships are more important. And so I think like in different communities or in different societies, the relationship aspect is so strong and there's so many rules that there's never even the room to find yourself.
Right.
Because you have to always be keeping up. I was listening this morning to like a reel and it was talking about like what does success mean? And so many like ideas of American society is like buy a house and, get a degree and then, have a family. And there's like so many milestones and markers. And when you get that, that means that you're okay. And he was just like challenging it and saying, not necessarily does that mean you're okay. Like just because you've brought into what society has told you about what a milestone or what success means, not everybody is capable of that success. And so if you are, let's say, somebody who can't do all of those things, who can't get a degree, who can't go to college, or who doesn't want to buy a house, or can't maintain a house, or can't afford a house, then all of a sudden you're going to start feeling yourself to be something else. Like you're going to be living somebody else's dream.
Right.
It's not authentic to you.
Right. I mean, so many times you hear people who went for a degree that they're like, oh, my whole family's doctors, so I went for a medical degree. And then a couple of years later, they're like, that's not really something that I enjoy doing.
Right. Like they live somebody else's life and then they stop and they say, I'm just not happy.
Right.
Usually we're not happy when we're living somebody else's authenticity and not our own. And that's why it's so important to know what we want rather than what's been told to us. And sometimes what's told to us is what we also want. And that's fine.
Right.
It's not like we always have to like rebel against what everybody else is saying.
It's just checking and making sure. This is kind of really reminding me of the conversation we had around identity right now.
Yeah,
I feel like
way back when.
Similar things. Yeah, way back when in the beginning of our podcast. And forming an identity is similar to finding your own authenticity.
Yeah.
Because when we were talking about identity, we wanted to help someone form an authentic identity.
Right. To be true to themselves.
Yeah. So the first step is forming that identity of like knowing who you are, knowing your values. But then the next step of authenticity is also to act that way.
Right.
It's not just to know, have the self-awareness that this is what I like and this is who I am, but it's also to make sure your behavior is reflecting those values. That ultimately is acting authentically.
Right. Yeah. It's with your actions. Like your actions have to be in line with what your authenticity inside is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because then if not, it's not being authentic.
And also the choices that you make. Like the choices that you make, like there's the actions that you take, but then the choices that you make for your future, the more authentic they are and in line with who you are, the better off you'll be and the happier you're going to be later.
Yeah. And I really like this. What Carl Jung said about authenticity is about that so many times people put on a persona, right? And it's similar to what you were saying about Winnicott saying the false self. But we put on a persona, maybe consciously, like for work as a therapist, right? I need to be grounded and I need to be a blank slate and I need to be appropriate and professional. Right. The problem is that sometimes people take this persona home, right? So let's say you think of a teacher, right? So in school, they're strict and they're giving the rules. If that person takes that persona home with them and then is acting that way towards their husband or acting that way towards their children, then that persona gets so mixed in with their own identity that they get confused and they're no longer authentic.
Right.
And I think that so many times we need to have a persona because of our job or even just appropriate. You see somebody in the street and you might think something negative, like you're not going to say it to them. So that's not being authentic. But like, yeah, social skills and being kind to people. We don't just say whatever's on our mind. So you put our persona as being a nice person on the street, even though inside, for whatever reason.
But I think that is being authentic because if you look at yourself, if you're a nice person, you don't just necessarily want to say everything that you're thinking. Right. So that is being authentic, even though on the one hand, you're like, what's wrong with that person?
Right.
But then you go and you are nice to them because in your inner values, you value being a nice person.
Well, if that person values being a nice person.
Right. If they value it.
My point is that having a persona is important.
For sure. It's really important to have a persona because it's not, I think it's not safe. Right. To have complete authenticity and that everybody sees it. Like, I think that that's a violation. Right. There has to be parts within yourself that are completely private where nobody necessarily knows or only like a best friend or a spouse or someone who's really close to you knows. But like, it's not possible for that authenticity to be constantly in the world. It's like walking out without any armor.
Exactly.
Like, that's completely dangerous.
Right. But I think that what the problem is, what happens is when people take the persona home with them and they forget that it's a persona and it gets blended and it gets confused. And that's when you see a lot of people having an identity crisis years later and saying, wait, who am I? Because they took on this persona, but this persona is a part of you.
Yeah.
It's not the whole you.
Right. And I like that because it's a part of you, right? We all have different parts of ourselves and we need to show up in different ways. Like the authenticity can show up in different ways. It can show up at home one way. It can show up at work one way. It can show up with friends another way. And it doesn't have to be like only one authenticity, right? As we talk about like identity, like we said, it's not just one piece. You're not just one person.
Right.
You're a bunch of things combined together, and different circumstances are going to bring out different parts of your identity. So same thing with authenticity. Like we can't like make it as small as you are one thing and one authenticity. Like it's not that. You can be many things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over the weekend, like I met up with a person and I didn't know who this person was. And the first introduction to my husband and I was talking about how much money they spent. And they kept saying like, I would buy this and I would spend this on my wife, and I would, I'm going to come to you to buy this from you. And they just like kept like building themselves up. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking like, this is so fake. This is so fake. Like, why do you need to prove to me how rich you are? Like, why do you need to prove to me how much you spend? And I'm not believing it anyways, because it feels like a show. Like it didn't feel authentic, but somehow like you have to show yourself to be that. And I'm thinking like, when you're young, you probably can't even afford those things. Like, and you don't have to afford those things, but why do you have to pump yourself up to be something that you're not? In order to please us, because that's not my language either. Of like, that's, if you would read me enough, you would know like how to match my authenticity, which is also like an interesting concept of like matching authenticity.
Right.
Of if I, on the one hand, like if I want to be an authentic person and I want to like do a fake authenticity, I can say, well, what's authentic to you? And let me say those things.
Right.
So let's say I know that what's authentic to you is therapy or self-help or growth. What I might then say is like, today, like it was so hard for me and it was a struggle. So it's not authentic to me, but I want to win you over.
Right.
So therefore I'm like fake identifying with the authenticity.
Yeah, I'm this is making me think about like I have this one friend also who always I don't know, friend is a strong word, but person that I know always talks about like her travels and the money she's spending, and like when I'm with her I find myself also like digging up like, oh well, I traveled here and I bought this and let's spend money on this. Like she brings up that part of me. Yeah. So it's just interesting. So like that comes up to me that wants to match that, and I feel very inauthentic when I do that.
Right. And I think like in America, like that's just like a common thing, because like what's success and what's a milestone? Wealth. Right. The more you have, like the more successful you are. And that's also like an authentic thing that people want, because it's going to give you a happier life.
Someone who's going to use your words against you are not safe. Someone who's going to, who makes you feel bad about yourself, who's going to look down at your vulnerability or your authenticity and judge it. Like if you're being your authentic self and you're being vulnerable and somebody judges that hurts.
Yeah, it really hurts.
It's because it's raw. It's like you're open and then they're like scratching you.
Right. It's like, I don't like you.
Right.
Like, I don't like you for the you.
Yeah. So if you're having like kind of like fake conversations in the park with people and you're talking about school and clothing and you're matching their vibes and you're being inauthentic, whatever happens, you don't care. You don't put yourself out there. But if you're having honest conversation and you're showing your honest true self and that's not received or that's not liked or that's made fun of afterwards.
Right. It can be really painful.
It's really painful.
Yeah. It's like I was listening to this quote and it says, if you can't be your authentic self, you're basically telling yourself that your authentic self isn't good enough.
Right. Right. And that's the lesson that somebody was, or we were taught, or people were taught from a child. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. So let's say hide the authentic self, hide the authentic self. And suddenly people are adults and they're not the authentic self. Like think of a schoolgirl that's taught like, be more studious, sit down, don't move so much. You know what I mean? Study better, learn better. They put on this persona or this fake self of being like a studious, if they want to get by, right? If they want to be liked, if they want to win over that attachment, then they put on this self as like being a studious girl, not talking out loud, not being obnoxious, all these things that are not necessarily really, they like being loud and wild and fun. That's a part of themselves, but they kind of say that's not good enough.
Right.
The studious people pleaser girl is good enough.
I think like that's the hardest, is when your authentic self is not in line with who you think you want to be, or what everybody says is the better thing to be. And that's like it's not fitting in, and then you feel like you don't belong, and so you try to adapt, like you said, for the relationships, but like how much time can you spend adapting to something that you're just not? Like that's exhausting, like living your life working against yourself.
Right. And relationships are really important, so it is hard to be able to like, or hard, or also it is a loss to be like, I'm going to be authentic and I'm going to stand on my own and then lose a whole community.
Right. I'm thinking
it's a very big trade-off.
Right, it is. And I don't know I think most people wouldn't lose their community. I think most people would just say, let's adapt, which is fine, right? There's nothing wrong with it as long as you're okay with it and mindfully making that choice. But if you're constantly feeling like I'm going against me and me and me and me, like you're going to be left with depression. Yeah. Like you can't stay your entire way. You can't be your entire life just doing that. It just doesn't work. Like you need to be in line with yourself somewhat.
Yeah.
It's like making me think though, like some people though will purposely say like, I need to be my authentic self and therefore I need to like be against everybody. So it's like those people that say who will walk into shul and be like, I need to be my authentic self and therefore I'm not going to dress like everybody else.
Right.
Or I need to be my authentic self and therefore like I'm going to state my opinion because like that was my truth when it might be hurtful.
Right. So
and like it can't be in the name of like authenticity.
In a way to explain this is me. I have a funny story. I remember when I was like dating and all my friends were dating, we were all talking about like how to be your authentic self on the date. And one of my friends said, and I thought this was so funny and I still like laugh at it. She said like, she's like, yeah, I have a friend who like wanted to show the guy her authentic self. So acted like her craziest, wildest self that she acts at 2 a.m. in the morning when she had way too much sugar. That happens twice a year. And then of course the guys are running away and she's like, but I need to be me. They need to know who I am. She's like, that's not you. She's like, that's a part of you. It's still not appropriate on a first date. And they're like, no, but I need to make sure that I'm showing them who I am. Like, no, you can be calm and collected on a first date when you're meeting someone. But she was so scared of not having her authentic self shown that she like rebelled in that way by showing a part of herself that is twice a year when she's over hyper and she hasn't slept, that she acts. Yeah, maybe it's important the guy can see that, but he can see that on a 12th date. He doesn't need to see that on a first date. But also
when you force it, is it authentic anymore?
But like, I think it comes from the fear of not having, of being scared that someone's not going to see your authenticity.
Yeah. And that if they don't see it, will they accept you?
Right. And then are you authentic? And I think that I think that's an important part. We all have different authentic parts and we don't need if we're like shoving it in other people's face, then it becomes not real.
Yeah. It's
and it has to be what's right in the moment and what you need in the moment and what feels true in the moment.
Right. Yeah. It's reminding me also like with dating. I think like I had that a little bit also where I was trying to fit myself into the boxes of who they were.
Right.
Rather than try to be me. I knew who I was and I knew who I needed to be, but somehow like to play that dating game, I felt like I needed to like adapt. So this one is a little bit more yeshivish, act a little bit more yeshivish, or like this one's a little bit cooler, so like show your cooler side.
On the dates?
You were just like, I'm here, I'm showing up, like no adapting,
like
you like me or you don't like
little
me.
Guys away.
Like let's see who can win me over and handle me.
But I did hear that message, though, of like, let them say yes and you decide no. In order to let them say yes, you have to play that game. You have to bend to who they are. And that's being very inauthentic to yourself.
Right. Yeah, and we do adapt to relationships always, right? Like with friendships, we adapt. Like with relationships, we adapt. Like we're never just like, I'm sitting in my circle right here and you have to like, bend yourself to me. We are constantly adapting, but like we can't adapt to the point where we lose ourselves.
Right.
Like adapt where we can't recognize ourselves anymore. And I think like sometimes like mothers even like get into this phase where like they lose themselves, where they know it's authentic to them, but because they're like in so much of the hassle of like day-to-day stuff, that they lose themselves in terms of like they don't know how to self-care anymore. And like,
I was thinking about this yesterday because I was in the shoe store. I was getting my kids' boots, and there was like another mother there, and she looked like me, like just like ready to snap. It's like a winter cold day, nothing to do. We're in the shoe store. She was like getting so annoyed at her kids, and I was like, I feel you, And I was like, are we all just walking around on the verge of snapping? Like that
I
was
hope
like
not.
That was like a thought that came to me yesterday because it was like a dark, cold day.
Yeah. But why do we have to be that way? They're like because like on the one hand, I think that's glorified. Like we joke
that we're
about
on
it.
the verge of snapping.
Yeah, it's like a glorified thing.
I think because like honestly, and this is going off the topic of authenticity, I feel like, but I think honestly, I was thinking about it yesterday. Like it was hitting me. I was like, why are we both walking around like on the verge of snapping? And I was like, I think because it's too much. And there's no way to really make it less, though. Even with all the self-care and all the help, it's still just a lot. If you have a job and you have kids and you have a house and all these things that you're trying to upkeep, it's all just a lot, right?
So maybe the shoulds are too much. The shoulds that we live up to maybe are too much.
Right. But it also might not be possible to take away, right? Like someone needs a job, has kids, like those two components together are a lot.
But are there ways that, like, what would make it easier?
I think about this a lot. To continue on the subject, I hung out with my friend and she has 2 kids under the age of 2. And she has a full-time lady in her house and she goes to work from 9 to 3, which is like, I'm so tired. I was like, you need that lady from 9 to 3 so they can go a nap, but just financially.
Right.
And I think that, she needs to work in order to pay for her help.
Right.
So she doesn't have the luxury when her lady comes from 9 to 5 to go back to sleep from 9 to 5. She has to go work from 9 to 5 to pay for the lady.
Right.
The alternative would to be not have the job and not have the lady, which didn't sound better. So she had those 2 options and she picked the one which sounds better.
Right.
But ultimately,
we're always making choices.
What she needs to be a functional being at this point is to have that lady from 9 to 5 and she can go to sleep from 9 to 5. Okay, that's maybe an exaggeration, but definitely a couple hours, 9 to 1. You know what I mean? She needs that. She's up the whole night. She has 2 little babies. Yeah. Anyways, I feel like I said a lot of thoughts, and they're not necessarily, they're just
pulled
thoughts.
together.
They're not pulled together at all, and a different topic of authenticity.
I don't think so. I think it is, because like what we're talking about is living up to
losing your authentic self.
Losing your authentic self because of so many responsibilities and because of so many.
Lose your that's more of like a topic of like losing yourself. Is it losing your authentic self?
I think so. But then again, like, did you make choices that were your choices to give you the life that you wanted, right?
I mean, yes, ultimately, and still sometimes you could lose yourself in those choices.
Yeah.
I think it boils down to time and money. That's what I think it really boils down to. Like, there's not enough time in the day for you to work as much as you want to work, for you to have as much self-care as you want to have self-care, for you to exercise as much as you want to exercise, and for you to relax as much as you want to relax.
But I do believe that people are making choices not in line with their authentic selves. They're making choices because of what everybody just does, which is a controversial topic. But I think that there are certain things where it's like your life is prescribed for you. You're told what to do. And a part of that is because of the peer pressure, or just because everybody's doing it and you don't want to be left out. You continue to do that. Like, how many times have I heard women say that they just want to get married because their friends are getting married, and if they don't get married, then they're going to be lonely because there's going to be nobody left. Or the same thing with children. They want to have children because their friends are up to number 3 or 4, and they're only at number 1 or 2, and therefore they kind of feel like, I'm not going to have like who to hang out with because our kids aren't going to align, and it's going to ruin my social life.
People have, they have 2 different wants that are maybe polarized. People, they want to get married, and they want to have kids, and they want to have a family, and they love that life. And when they have that life, it's really hard because they also want to be free and to work more and to travel. And those 2 butt heads.
Right. You can't have both. You for sure can't have both.
So let's say, once you're in the life of children and a home, you can't really stop that, right? Because you're not going to like give up your kids for I mean, people will, but I'm saying that, you have the kids. So you're you're running in that mill, and you wanted that. And if you didn't have that, you would be devastated. This is your choices. But you also still want other things.
You can't have everything.
And sometimes, and I think that this line is a line that I heard that was a really good line. You could have everything, just not at the same time.
It's a good line, but I don't know if it's true. Because if you want to travel in your youth, but you're busy, you can't.
If you put it in your youth, you can't come back. But I'm saying if you want to have kids and you want to travel and you want to focus on a career, you can't do that all in the same year. But maybe 10 years later, when your kids are older, is the time you can start and travel. And maybe when your kids are in high school and you have more time in the afternoon, is the time you can go back to school.
I think the reason I don't like that quote is because I think it's instilling false hope.
I don't like it.
I mean, it is very hopeful, right? It sounds amazing. Like, you can have everything, but like ultimately, like, we can't. Everything we see on Instagram, we can't have.
I mean, okay, of course we can't have everything, but I'm saying if you put down your goals, realistic goals, and not these like crazy goals, and you can't do it in the same year. The year you're pregnant is not the year you can go skiing.
No.
But I'm talking about small things. I'm not talking about
small
like
things
everything.
For sure. Yeah,
I'm talking about realistic things. Of course, you can't have everything. No, you can't live in Aruba in a castle.
Right.
I mean, maybe, but I'm saying like that. I'm not talking about those kind of goals. I'm saying everything. If someone wants to have a good career and they also want to spend some time traveling, but they also want to have a family, like those are realistic goals. Maybe not all at the same time.
Right. Like, you can't be like, I was listening to this person, and she was like in school, like intense school. I don't remember what she was going for, but she was like, I cannot make the potato kugel from scratch and be there for my kids and do my schoolwork and do my internship all at the same time as being a sane person. Right. So she says, we're going to have takeout, and we're going to make sure that I have a tutor for school to help me with my papers. And we're going to make sure that I have a rest.
But this goes back to financials, though, for like the people that feel like they're losing it. It's because all those things are luxuries. I think it all boils down to money.
It boils down to money.
To be able to do the takeout, to be able to do the tutor, that all costs money. So if you're dealing with somebody that still wants to keep their sanity, but still needs to have supper on the table for the kids, and still needs to do this and still needs to do this, they can't afford the takeout, they can't afford the cleaning help, they can't afford to quit their job.
So if money is so valued, then people need to get it younger. Like, that needs to be a part of their plan then. If they want these lifestyles, they then have
people
to
don't think about
build, which is a problem. Because if your authentic self is telling you, I want a certain life, part of
that
maybe
life they don't care. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're not like they want this high luxurious life. It's just...
We're not talking about luxuries here, right? We're talking about a family of 5 kids. That's not a luxury. That costs money, tuition, food.
The question is, I mean, do people think, I'm curious, I don't know, do people think of it as money? Or people like,
how do you not, though? Like, how do you not think of that as money?
People look at them, are feeling run down and are feeling tired. They're like, this is just life. Or they're like, if I had money, I wouldn't have these stresses and I could feel better about myself.
Right. I mean, money does solve a lot of that.
Right. And to an extent, right? Because there might be, and again, I'm talking about myself, like the polarized feelings of like wanting to be with my child and also wanting wanting to be on my own. No money's going to fix that. as a daily afternoon polarized thing. If I need 2 hours after work to really feel like I am the most sane person, but I also don't want to give up the afternoon because I want to be with my child. Those are two really polarized feelings that I have.
Right.
And that's, I think, where I'm stuck with my authenticity, let's say. I don't know if authenticity feels like the right word in this conversation, but that's where I'm stuck.
I think it's just like torn big life paths.
Right. And these two big norths. So I'm trying to juggle everything, right? Because I'm trying to give myself and I'm trying to take care of my exercise and I'm trying to work and I'm trying to be with my child. But there's no perfect harmony. Everyone talks about the work-life balance. I don't find there's a perfect balance because I want to do everything.
Right. I mean, we're always struggling with work-life balance. Like, I feel like I'm struggling with that always of like, is it too much, too little? Like, I need more attention. I need less attention. Like, I want to be available more. I want to be available less, right? And so I find that very, very hard. And I think most people find that really, really hard. And there's no like right answer. Like, on the one hand, it's the most popular topic to talk about. But I haven't had anybody say this is the answer.
Yeah, it's very interesting how authenticity got to this because I don't think it's the same thing as authenticity. It's about like priorities and
but I think we got here because we were talking about losing your authenticity. And I think like when you make certain choices, it might lead to losing your authenticity. And ultimately though, like what is it boiling down to? Like your identity. You were talking about like, I want to be with my kids, but I also want to be out and about, and you can't have both at the same time because ultimately like both of those are your authentic selves. Like there's a part of your authentic self that wants to travel or wants to go away or wants to do things. But there's a part of yourself that says, I want to be a really great mom. And so those two are in conflict because you can't do both at the same time. Right. So what if our authenticity is in conflict? I see this a lot, like, with like the term keep it up aim, where a lot of times like, young adults will say, I really want to be a good daughter. I really want to be a good son. I really want to not be like chutzpahdik to my parents. I want to be respectful. But at the same time, like, I don't want to always be doing everything for them. I need to find myself. Right. And so they have this desire to individuate and to be their own person, but they can't at the same time as being a really, and I think like that's the conflict inside where it's like, I'm a lose-lose. Like no matter what I do, someone is going to get hurt. Yeah. I think that can be like, hit your head against the wall kind of situation because you're like, I'm done before I even started. And so like, and it's very similar to your situation where it's like, no matter what I choose, someone's going to lose. And like, I think it's a perfectionistic standard to like assume that we could like choose one because we can't. And somehow like something is going to get lost or someone is going to be upset. We can't be there for everything.
I guess one solution to not letting the authentic self get lost in these kind of situations is to still be aware of it. Mm-hmm. So even if you can't serve it at this time, it's kind of like what I said, like you could do everything just not all at once. It's saying like, I didn't forget about myself. I know that my authentic self loves to, for example, right now, travel and see the world. But right now I'm choosing to spend the next 5 to 10 years investing in my work and my marriage and my children and being home and showing some stability and being home every afternoon. But I know that deep down I love to travel. So in the meantime, maybe once a week I'll spend an hour looking online, a place that I would love to see and saving it for the future because I know that one day when we save up money or when the kids are married or whenever that time comes, I will do it versus burying it and pretending that you don't want it anymore because I think it hurts to see something that we want and we can't have. So people tend to just bury it and forget about it. Let's pretend that I don't even want to travel because if I look to travel and I can't do it because of finances or other responsibilities, that's going to hurt too much. Right. So then you bury it and you lose yourself and you force yourself to forget about it in order to live. But that, I think in the end, that costs more. Mm-hmm. And knowing that just because I can't do something right now doesn't mean I can never do it or I can't do a smaller version of it in order to keep that part of you alive.
Mm-hmm. And so also like maybe just building towards it.
Exactly.
Because
so
like if you're just like put it on the side, it feels like I'm never going to get there. But if like you take small steps towards it, like you said, planning it, right? So that's like doing something. So when I'm ready and when I can afford it, I can go and do that.
Exactly. So even if I can't go skiing in Vail this year, maybe I can take my kids snow tubing and, that can feel similar to it.
Have a different outlet.
Exactly. So I think that as long as we don't forget about it and bury it because it hurts too much and we're aware of this other parts of ourselves that exist, but we can't give it attention right now, I think then we can feel like it's still part of our identity and feel like we're living an authentic life.
Right.
So it was interesting how authenticity got us to a topic that I feel like was like a little all over the place and not even like so connected necessarily all with it with authenticity. But I guess what this shows us is that authenticity is a complicated topic.
Yeah. It's complicated because like we have so many different authentic parts of ourselves and oftentimes like they're in conflict with one another. Yeah. And when they're fighting, like it's hard to then like understand like what should I choose and like which will make me happier, which will I feel more fulfilled in. And then you do have people who have that midlife crisis. Right. But we don't want to be that person who's in the midlife crisis. How do we know which ones to choose now versus having a bad result later?
Yeah. It's a really good question that we'll leave people off with to think about. And maybe we'll talk about this topic a little bit more when we get more clarity ourselves.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.